gentlemen, please welcome on stage Adriano Mongini, CEO, Azule Energy, Nicolas Terraz, President of Exploration and Production, TotalEnergies, Adif Zulkifli, Executive Vice President and CEO, Upstream, PETRONAS, Moderator, Amrita, Founding Partner and Director of Research, Energy Aspects.
It's always hard to follow a futurist, and especially to match that energy. Our topic, of course, has energy or energizing, through oil and gas companies. So, we need to get started discussing. Really, let's ground this in the now, and then we can talk about the future a little bit. Just to set the scene, I just put together a couple of very quick kind of data points to show you guys, okay, what are we really talking about in terms of oil and gas, and when we talk about the need, really, about oil and gas and the importance of oil and gas, what at least we think will continue to play a role in the future. We're talking about 2050 over here, right? Not just 2030. And of course, you're going to see much more in the form of renewables, in the form of any alternative forms of energy. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we will still require oil and gas because global electricity demand is going to continue to go, and particularly gas, which is what we're going to talk about a lot in this panel. And you will hear from a lot of our speakers precisely as to why gas is so important and the role gas is going to play. Sorry, I'm going to go back one slide. One of the things we must talk about, and I'm very, very privileged because on my panel we've got CEOs who are stationed in places like Angola and Indonesia to provide this context from actually a global perspective, not just an OECD or a European perspective, where you can see in emerging markets population growth and economic growth go hand in hand with energy. Without energy demand, we're not going to be able to sustain economic growth. And I think that's one of the key challenges we face when we are dealing with governments around the world. And here's the issue, right? We do know global emissions, hopefully, we think at least will peak around 2030. We're not close to net zero. However, the industry is on the right path. Again, not just companies like Baker Hughes, but even CEOs who are with me here today. I think one of the biggest things to talk about really are how are your companies dealing with climate change while addressing some of the biggest challenges we have, whether it be energy poverty and also just energy security. So yeah, with that, I think I will first ask Nicolas, tell me in terms of what I've just shown you in global, the broader energy mix, do you agree that oil and gas will continue to play a role, or do you think, you are from TotalEnergies, do you think it's going to be much more electricity or just renewables focused?
Well, I think, thank you first, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I think the starting point is really what you've shown on the screen, that the global demand for energy is growing. It's driven by the growth in population. It's driven by aspirations to better living standards. And so I will not oppose the energies on oil and gas against electricity. In TotalEnergies, we have two pillars. Oil and gas is one pillar, and integrated power is a second pillar. But what I want to say is that first, if we take oil today is close to 30% of the global energy mix. Pretty much everybody is expecting that demand for oil will at one point stabilize and then decline, and I think that's what you had on your chart. This being said, today the demand for oil is increasing. It increased by 2 million barrels per day last year. The IEA is forecasting an increase of 1.2 million barrels per day this year. And at the same time, the production of the existing fields is declining by, let's say, 4% per year. So every year we are losing 4 million barrels per day of capacity without any new investment. So I think the role of oil and gas companies is really to supply that demand and to supply this demand with less emissions. We used to say, our motto at TotalEnergies is more energy, less emissions. So that's for oil. Gas, we see gas as a great transition fuel. I think we need to remember that coal is still about a quarter of the global energy mix. So there is still a huge potential of substitution of coal by gas, particularly for power generation. So we see a growth in the gas demand of about 5% per year, and gas playing a key role in the transition. Also, because gas is a nice complement to renewables for power generation, gas provides a flexible power generation that can be dispatched, on demand. And at the end of the day, customers, they need firm power, not intermittent power. So yes, oil and gas have an important role to play. Oil and gas companies have a role to play to supply the demand in an affordable manner and with less emissions. So just to illustrate this, for my company, TotalEnergies, with set criteria for new projects. So we're saying the new projects, they need to have a greenhouse gas emission intensity below a certain threshold, and in fact, to be better than the average of our existing portfolio, so that gradually we reduce the emission intensity of our productions. On those new projects also, they need to be low cost, to be resilient in the future as the energy mix will evolve.
Adif, if I can turn to you, please, because Nicolas made a very good point about coal still being such a dominant part, and especially in Asia. I mean, I'm not saying Malaysia is necessarily entirely coal-based, but the region still is. But your company in particular is championing gas in many, many ways. But just tell us and give us a bit of perspective, really the Asian perspective about how Asia views the energy mix and the future of that.
Certainly. First of all, thank you for having me over on this panel. It's been a great conference so far. So just going back to Asia, Asia is the fastest growing region in the world today. It's getting a lot more affluent. Population growth is on a steady upward trend. And increasingly, there will be a lot more for energy demand. I think that's a fact. And if you look at Asia today, roughly about 4.5 billion people. Even as we speak today, about 500 million people in Asia does not have access to electricity. About 2 billion probably suffer from power disruptions here and there. So the issue is not having secured energy supply, but also, most importantly, affordable energy supply. And hence, I think there's a lot of dependence still on coal. I mean, countries like China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia still depends roughly about 50 to 60% coal to generate power. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to displace coal. And then this is where I believe gas will have a lot of role to play. And then I think there's a lot of switching opportunity to switch first from coal to gas. And with that, I think there's a lot of potential for us to reduce emission going in. And the fact of the matter today, gas is also quite abundant, it's accessible, and also affordable. And in that sense, I think you can ship gas from any parts of the world, and then I think increasingly there should be a lot more investment in Asia in building new power plants, especially gas power plants, that would displace this coal. And a company like PETRONAS, I think we have always been quite heavy on gas. We are 70% gas, and then we are a market leader in LNG. So again, we are committed to increasing the supply wherever we can, and to provide that energy source for Asia. And then I think at the end of the day, Asia needs affordable, secure, and sustainable energy. Yeah.
And let me ask you, Adriano, because Adif mentions power cuts, and I'm sure Africa is no stranger to that. You're based out of Angola, and I'm sure the Angolan government, not just the people, are extremely anxious given what over 95% of their revenues come from oil. So for them, gas must be not just like a transition fuel, it's almost an inevitable for them as a part of transition, because otherwise the country's sustainability is probably in question.
Yes, thank you. And definitely I'm looking from the angle of Angola. That is also the angle of many producing African countries. And what in the transition, what is most important for this country is to be what has been mentioned, a just transition. So the transition should help, and the decarbonization for sure is helping achieving and diversifying the economies, but the gas has a really important role. Because in Angola, for example, the gas is very recently just getting some value as a gas. till now, the only gas that is produced that is for free is flaring down through Angola LNG, but has zero value as upstream. So in the last few years, there have been steady development. The government give finally some value to the not associated gas. And this triggered the NGC, that is the first non-associated gas project. But more importantly, give us the opportunity to have exploration in gas. As TotalEnergies, we are very proud that next year we will drill the first gas exploration well in Angola in 2024 in the Block 114. And the hope is that so much gas has been found without searching for it. So how much gas will be found searching for it is the hope. But definitely, it is in the Block 114 with our partner Equinor. We are hoping to have a volume enough that not just supplying Angola LNG for export, helping the global transition, but what is important, and this is the just transition, is to help to build the gas value chain. And that is right now is just at the very beginning. There are petrochemical plants, urea, fertilizer. There are so many activities that can help the country to replace or to modify the mix. In terms of power generation, Angola is already very healthy power generation mix, already 50% with the plan to go 100%. So the real value of the transition is to help the country to replace in the economy and building new opportunity and the gas is definitely a big opportunity.
I'll just make a quick plug here in case anybody from the US administration is listening. I think everybody's made the case for gas and gas exports to need to continue. So just wanted to throw it out there. I mean, Lorenzo actually said this a few years ago. We were talking about this, and he was like, the focus of the market or the industry really should be on decarbonizing hydrocarbons, right? And I think the industry is coming around to realize, sorry, I shouldn't say the industry. Industries always realize that, but I think society hopefully is coming around to realizing that you can't really have economic growth without oil and gas, right? But then it becomes a question of decarbonization, and how are we doing that, to your point, Nicolas, as well, most cost-effective way, because otherwise, again, there's another burden of energy transition, which is the cost to society as well. It can be very, very inflationary. Actually, Adriano, I'm going to stick with you over there, because you've been talking about, and when we talked as well, about the decarbonization of operations, transforming the life cycle management of fields, right? Not just oil, but gas as well. I mean, do you see that, and also in terms of how Angola is viewing it, do you see a marked difference between what you are doing in Angola versus what's going on in the rest of the world?
The Angola has a very peculiar activity, so mostly is a deep water activity, so offshore activity. What, as you're saying, is correct. The decarbonization can be seen also as a bender of the life cycle of the oil field, oil and gas normal life. What I would like to highlight today is the importance of a very early stage of the oil and gas cycle, that is exploration, and how much important it is for the decarbonization. Because and in particular, the infrastructure lead exploration. And I have an example in the Block 11506. In the last few years, despite the fact that it has been explored for many decades, we have been able to find still hundreds of million barrels of reserves. This gives an opportunity that helps also the decarbonization, because it gives the opportunity to have a new FPSO that is under conversion right now, and replace an old, low efficiency in both operation and in emission, with a very bad emission, Angoma FPSO. So this gives the opportunity to have all the queue of the production that could have been through a very expensive and not very efficient life extension of the FPSO, replacing a new one. And replacing the new one, it is the Agogo. We are talking about Agogo FPSO. Is one of the two most advanced FPSO under construction in terms of emission. Just to mention, there are 14 highlights for emission reduction on Agogo FPSO. 3 that matter to mention is the a combined cycle power generation. This is the most efficient, 20% reduction in the emission. There is the recovery of the kinetic energy of the water for cooling of the FPSO. That is 1 megawatt recovered. And there is one that on Agogo is still limited in terms of impact, but very important, that there is a CCU recovery unit. So a portion of the exhausted gas go through equipment that keep some CO2 that goes to be rejected in the reservoir. This is the first time that will be implemented offshore. So the importance is, in terms of really improvement, is just 1% of the CO2 of the emission, but is the test. So it is a technology that could increase the efficiency in the future. So exploration, replacement, very efficient in the reduction, but it's not enough, because we wanted to have Agogo, the first carbon neutral FPSO in Angola. And for having reduced all the emission, there is another way to reduce the residual emission, and we are partnering with Sonangol, that is our partner in the decarbonization activity, with the UNDP and the government, in order to implement the first RED Plus project in Angola, that through the credit can compensate the residual emission of FPSO. And so we are expecting, we are not yet there, but the expectation is to have in 2026 the first FPSO carbon neutral in Angola.
That's fantastic. I mean, Adif, I will come to you because I want to talk to you about CCS, but before that, Nicolas, decarbonization, because based in Europe, some countries think the fact that you're talking about decarbonizing hydrocarbons, it shouldn't be allowed because that means you're producing hydrocarbons. What's TotalEnergies doing in terms of its operations? What are your views on this?
Well, I don't know if decarbonization is the right word, but what we're trying to do along the same line that Adriano described is to reduce our own emissions, so what we call our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And I think if everybody reduces its own emissions, we're going to be in a better place. So for us, we set objectives. First objective is to reduce by 40% our greenhouse gas emissions operated by 2030. And we also set for ourselves an objective of intensity, so to reduce the quantity of CO2 that we emit in our operations per barrel or per barrel of oil equivalent produced. So our intensity was at 20 kilograms actually per barrel, no matter the unit, back in 2022, was at 19 last year. And is going to be at 13. That's our target in 2028, in 5 years from now. So how we are doing that? We are doing that by focusing on all sources of emissions. So the first one is flaring, or the residual flaring, and we have a clear target to eliminate flaring. Of course, to eliminate routine flaring, and we are very close actually to be zero routine flaring. And we have a commitment to eradicate what remains by 2030, but also to eliminate the safety flaring. You know, today we have a big project to convert all our flares with a fuel gas recovery system to make sure that in normal operations there is absolutely zero flaring, even safety flaring. All our new facilities are designed, of course, for zero flaring today. Then the second part of emissions reduction is to improve the energy efficiency of our facilities by using more efficient equipment, typically, you know, in our facilities, we have a lot of redundancy in power generation, etc. So we try to reduce that redundancy in order to consume less fuel gas and to emit less CO2. We have a $1 billion energy efficiency improvement program that we launched over 23-24. And we think it's good for the climate, it's also good for the business, because when we reduce our own energy consumption, we can monetize the gas, or we can buy less energy and increase our revenue or reduce our cost. Decarbonization is also about eliminating methane emissions.
Yeah.
And we put a lot of focus on this and work a lot on this, because we also believe that gas is a great transition fuel, but gas needs to be without methane emissions across the chain. So to reduce methane emissions, first we need to measure them properly. So we are quite proud that we developed a methane monitoring technology, a new type of sensor, which is mounted on drones. And we are conducting today measurement campaigns on all our operated assets on a regular basis to basically assess the level of residual methane emissions and to eliminate them. So eliminating methane emission, it means, in some places we are still using instrument gas. So now we no longer do that. We convert into instrument air. We monitor the fugitive emissions, the small emissions here and there on the facilities, to be able to eliminate them as well. And of course, part of the methane emissions also is coming from flaring. So as you eliminate flaring, you eliminate methane.
So can I just ask you, Nicolas, while you're talking about this, because we've heard earlier today as well, clearly digitalization and AI, that's probably giving you even better numbers and data to be able to decarbonize or just make it more efficient, right?
Yes, alors digitalization helps in a lot of respects. Bon, in TotalEnergies, we started a few years ago by establishing what we call a digital factory. So we have 300 data scientists, experts, developers working with our affiliates around the world to find digital solutions to reduce first improve the safety of our operations. Typically, if we are talking about drilling, by being more predictive in what we are going to encounter in a well, the pressure regime, etc. Then to improve the efficiency of our production, the availability of our facilities, so it's a kind of more energy aspect of it, to decrease the emissions of our facility and to decrease the cost. So digitalization definitely is also a tool. More and more, also, we are measuring many things on our facilities. I was talking about the methane emissions, but I think the monitoring of our facilities to ensure that they operate in the best conditions is also a plus for emissions reduction.
Right. So, sorry, go on, yeah.
No, the last point I wanted to mention is I think part of also of the actions to reduce the emissions is as Adriano mentioned, carbon capture and storage. And what we're doing today is when each time we have a field, generally a gas field with native CO2, systematically we reinject this native CO2 into the reservoir, so there is no venting, and CCS is also part of the solution for sure. Reduction of our own emissions.
What a lovely cue to talk about CCS. Like I said, I'm going to come to you, Adif, to talk about that. Do you see it evolve in Malaysia from single source project to maybe hub-based, or because PETRONAS is big in this area?
Well, when you talk about oil and gas production, I think the fact remains there's just a space for oil and gas in the energy mix, but what we don't want is emission. And then when we look at the oil and gas operations, I think we have done quite a lot when it comes to reduction of emission by way of zero venting and zero flaring. And I'm happy to announce, for example, this year, I think PETRONAS achieved zero venting. So I think we have a target of achieving zero flaring by 2030. The reality is there are certain parts of our operation, especially combustion and also high CO2 gas, are quite hard to abate. And therefore, you need another scheme, and that is the carbon capture. So there will always be a residual CO2 that that you cannot divert to gas sales, or you cannot reduce. And I think for us, I think we are also operating in a location in South China Sea, where increasingly we are making discoveries of gas fields with high CO2 content. And then for PETRONAS, I think we have been pioneering quite a bit on the gas separation technology, using membrane technology, cryogenic, and so on. But what we have not done yet is to sequester that and store them into underground. So therefore, back in November last year, we sanctioned our first CCS project. And we are producing a field that has got about 3.3 million tons of CO2 emission. And then for the life of us, I think we cannot allow this sort to happen anymore in this day and age. So therefore, we embark on a phase 2, what we call this Kasawari CCS development. And we sanctioned that last year in November 22, and then that is slated to come on stream at the end of 2025. And we're working very hard with Baker Hughes to put together the right level of equipment so that we are able to do the injection and so on. And CCS today is a single project, and it's only catered for what I call this monetization of high CO2 gas fields. Yeah. The good thing is that we are going to put infrastructure, and then we are going to go into a site, a depleted gas field that has more than enough capacity to cover for Kasawari, and in future we have capacity to also cater for third-party emitters. And because of that, I think we believe that sets a good, base for it to be a hub in the future. And with that excess capacity, with the offshore installation that we put in place, with the pipeline that we put in place, and we will be able to actually not only decarbonize the high CO2 gas field, but also decarbonize our own operations. Yeah. I mean, they are still a bit in terms of the combustion that needs to be abated. And also, increasingly, I think we are also operating in a locality where we have our midstream, our LNG production. And they do have AGRUs that we run, and then those CO2 that we separate needs to go somewhere, and therefore that sets a good scene for us to inject into the storage location that we are developing. And thirdly, which we are quite actively talking to many partners in industry, is to bring in foreign emitters to Malaysia to inject into our storage sites. On the last count, I think Malaysia has got about 13.3 gigatons of CO2 storage. That's based on the CCS Institute estimate. We estimate only simply based on our gas fields, once they become depleted, we have up to about 2.5 billion or 2.5 gigatons of storage space. And I think we can position Malaysia as a CCS hub. And at the moment, I think we are advancing not only this Kasawari project, we have another 2 more high CO2 gas we are developing. One with PTTEP is called Lang Lebah, and another one I think we are doing with JX Nippon, we call BIGST. It's a collection of about 7 fields. That are all based on to monetize the high CO2 gas field. But we are also advancing 3 projects at the moment for hubs for CO2 injection. And we have got one in partnering with Total. We call it the South CCS Hub. So we have got one on the eastern side of Malaysia, one on the northern side. And then hopefully we're going to push this one through FEED this year. And hopefully we can not only get the technical right, but most importantly, the commercial arrangement needs to be there. So we are able to pay off for the projects. So if it's feasible, we hope to take this to FEED by next year. And then hopefully we can get at least 1 or 2 fully FID'd by, say, end of 2025 or early 2026. So that's the ambition, that's the aspiration, but it's quite a long way to go, especially when it comes to commercial. And I think at the moment we do have support from the government in terms of the regulations, in terms of the policies and so on. I think they're putting whatever they can to support this. And we believe if we are able to position Malaysia as a CCS hub, it will also be able to bring some of the industries that requires, what I call sequestering CO2 emission. And I think there's an incentive for us to do that. And then I think we are not alone. I think Indonesia is looking at the same thing. Thailand is doing the same thing. Australia is doing the same thing. So I think there's a bit of a race to position the CCS hub.
Well, good luck. I think you've got a good plan ahead, that's for sure. In the interest of time, I think there is one question I do want to ask everyone. I think even if this panel, you might argue, is a little bit biased in saying that we will need oil and gas for years to come, we still have a challenge as an industry, which is how can the industry ensure there's social acceptance for oil and gas, right? So Nicolas, I'm going to start with you, because when you and I were chatting, I think the one thing you said that stuck with me is what we do in Angola or any other part of the world, people in France have a view on it. So you are probably in one of the most difficult positions in terms of location. And yeah, in Europe generally, right, there's a view on everything, whether it affects Europe or not, particularly when it comes to oil and gas. So what do you think of this?
No, I think it's a question of making our activities acceptable and even desirable. It's a question of sustainability for us. So, you know, we came up with 4 key pillars or axes. The first one, we discussed it, it's contribute to address the climate challenge by reducing our own emissions, but also by helping our customers to reduce their emissions. I think the second one is, you know, we need to contribute to people well-being, to care for the people. And it starts with basic things such as safety of our activities. And you know, we don't talk too much about safety, but
yeah, of course.
In the company we do. It's a value. We need to make sure everybody working on our sites, our facilities, is safe. It's about providing good working conditions, decent compensations and salaries. So caring for our people. The third axis for us is care for the environment. Today, each of our sites, for instance, has a biodiversity action plan. We have a net zero deforestation policy, so each time we impact a forest area, we have to compensate. We have principles for responsible use of water resources. So caring for the environment, besides you know, contributing to address the climate challenge. On the number 4 and last one is really about creating shared value with our communities, with our stakeholders. So there are several ways to do this in a meaningful manner. One way is to provide energy to people. So if you take, for instance, our project in Uganda, in this project, we're going to extract the LPG, the propane and butane, for local distribution. So not only we export energy and we export oil, but we also provide some energy to the local people. And by the way, by doing that, we substitute wood or charcoal as energy, so it's also good for the climate. Another example I can give is our multi-energy project in Iraq, where besides, you know, the gas gathering and valorization, etc., so the hydrocarbon part of the project, we are building a 1 gigawatt solar plant for supply of power to the Basra region. So that's a good way also to create shared value, besides, of course, the traditional ways of doing it, local employment, local content, etc.
Adif, you probably don't deal with the amount of protests we deal with in Europe, right? Stop oil and everything else. I mean, surely PETRONAS in Malaysia, it's not just in terms of what Nicolas said, employment, but it's oil and gas in Asia, in Africa, it's just viewed very differently as an oil and gas company, right?
Well, I mean, as a company, we may not have that pressure that you see, you know, the people picketing outside our HQ. But as a company, we have made commitments. Yeah. So PETRONAS have declared net zero carbon emission by 2050. And we do have an obligation to our bondholders, to our investors. And I think they do keep track of us in terms of how we are doing, in terms of roadmap towards net zero. So I think we do that quite diligently. I think first, I think in terms of measurement, it's quite safe to say that we have come to a level that we can measure all our emission at every point. Quite comprehensively. I won't say accurately just yet. I think technology evolves, allows you that level of accuracy. And we also made pledges to, for example, World Bank zero routine flaring by 2030. We have also made pledges to OGMP. And I think all those sort of things bodes quite well for a company like PETRONAS as we embrace the energy transition, as we work together with the world community to reduce emission and also to be part of the climate actions. And with that, I think we do this quite diligently, and I think we do have a chief sustainability officer that keeps us honest all the time. So we do have internal pressure, and then I think at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we stick true to our words.
No, of course.
I think most importantly. So I think we pay quite a lot of attention to that. And I think, for example, any new oil and gas development, I think we have a very strict carbon guideline, we call it. You know, every new development, we have got to make sure it comes with zero venting, zero flaring. And we have got to see as much as we can do if we can electrification so that we can reduce combustion. And if we cannot, I think we have got to consider sequestration. And again, that adds costs and more challenges to oil and gas development. Yeah. And like Nicolas, I think we've been trying very hard, also what we call, trying to go for oil field development that gives us a bit better advantage when it comes to carbon intensity, in terms of the materiality that we can actually pursue carbon abatement initiative within the projects. I think those are the things that we are doing today, in addition to many, many other things in terms of trying to reach to net zero carbon by 2050.
Adriano, last word from you. Based in Angola, I mean, BP and ENI, BP continues to face climate activists in the UK and I'm sure in other parts of the world, but how do you see yourselves in Angola in terms of social acceptance? Last word from you.
Yeah, the perception is very different from different countries. In producing African countries, Angola is one of them, is the perception is the decarbonization is a threat. What I believe is our role, and actually recently also Sonangol joined the decarbonization chapter of the COP28, as TotalEnergies did. That is a very important step, because what is the role of the industry is to transform the threat in opportunity. And the transition itself, it is an opportunity, and the diversification of the economy, or Angola economy, go through the decarbonization and how we manage these 20 years of still producing, increasing gas oil production. And as a company in the country, we have a responsibility on that.
Thank you. As some of the things I was saying earlier as well, we are on the right track, but we know we're not close to net zero, but companies like these are exactly pioneering the way ahead to balance both the requirement for economic growth through oil and gas, but also helping mitigate a lot of the climate impacts otherwise we would have to face. So please join me in thanking a fantastic panel. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah.